What drives the sports betting business in the U.S., what most people in the sports betting world in the U.S. care about, is iGaming, because that's the more profitable part of the business to them. So this next panel should be very interesting in that we're going to talk about the spread of iGaming in the U.S., and it's going to be moderated today by Anna.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Feldström. I am the US marketing lead with Playn'GO and moderating the panel on iGaming expansion in the US. Where is next? Our panelists today are Shawn Fluharty, Head of Government Affairs at Playn'GO, and Brandt Iden, VP of Government Affairs at Fanatics. So we're here to talk iGaming legislation in the expansion in the US, Shawn. What does that look like for Playn'GO?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for everyone for being here. And honored to be here on behalf of Playn'GO. So what it looks like from Playn'GO's perspective, it's a model that puts people first. We believe this is entertainment, and entertainment should not come with an increase in addiction, and the pursuit of profit in this industry should not come at the expense of people. So we put people first, and that's a sustainable model we want to see going forward in the United States. You will not see things like direct bonus buys from Playn'GO, because we believe in the games that we produce get you excited on the first spin and do not just entice you to dump your money in for a direct bonus buy. We believe that creates a sustainable model by putting people first going forward. And that's a conversation that has been had not in the United States, but worldwide. A recent study that was commissioned by Playn'GO and done by Opinium shows us that over 60% of participants in Denmark, Sweden, and the UK agree with that assessment. And that's the conversation we're going to start here in the United States going forward, and we're going to lead from the front when we do. And it's, iGaming has been expanding slowly. We're going to get into that in detail, and I'm glad to have Brandt Iden here with me, a great friend who is also leading the efforts with Fanatics.
So Brandt, you and Shawn, both of you have experience as lawmakers, and both of you have passed iGaming in your states. What is the roadblock with expansion in other states?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good morning. Thanks for having us. Brandt Iden with Fanatics Betting and Gaming, and very exciting to talk about sort of what's going on out there in the iGaming landscape and what we can look forward to. So to answer your question more specifically, it's very difficult. Passing iGaming legislation is hard, and it's not getting any easier. And there's some reasons for that. First and foremost, and Shawn and I always talk about, it's about education with lawmakers. Lawmakers need to know what it is you're doing. And sometimes we go into the room and we say, well, we're here to talk about iGaming, and they think you're talking about video games. They don't even really know the nomenclature that we're using, right? So we have to start there in some instances. And so it starts with the education piece, but then you have to remember, in a lot of these states, they already have sports betting. They're seeing the ads, they're seeing the studies that are coming out now as it relates to addiction and the problem gaming issues we're having. And so, there's a lot of concerns there, and you have to work through that. And so it just takes time, as Shawn knows. I mean, it seemed like it was maybe easier back when we did it, but I don't know. Back in the day, right?
I would say for any state that's looking to expand into iGaming, you have to find a champion in each state. So Brandt was a champion in Michigan. I was a champion in West Virginia. But we were able to move the ball down the field to get iGaming done. But if you don't have a champion that's doing that, then you run into a situation, as Brandt mentioned, there's an education gap. I serve with colleagues who struggle to silence their phone in a room like this, and now we're going to try to tell them that iGaming can be done on their phone. So clearly there's an education gap. And I feel that the industry has failed to really control the narrative going forward. Simply saying this makes money is not enough. I mean, that's not the only policy position we need. Shrinking the black market, protecting the consumer, that is good public policy. Those are things that lawmakers, when you talk to them, would like to see happen. Sure, the financial side of thing, everybody knows about it. If you walk out in the public right now and you ask an individual, should we pass iGaming? The public doesn't really understand what it is. So there's an education gap with the public as well. They need to understand what it is. But if you tell them, we can fund things by passing iGaming, or we could raise your taxes, what do you think they're gonna say? Pass iGaming, right? They do not want to see their taxes raised. So the old adage, raise new revenue, not taxes, still works today when you're talking about iGaming expansion.
Absolutely.
So let me ask both of you, do you think iGaming has a messaging problem in the US, and how do we change that?
Yeah, look, I mean, so yes is the answer to the question, very simply. But I go around and I really start with internet casino, right? I mean, that's what it is. You have to sort of call this what it is with lawmakers, because as Shawn just sort of articulated, you've got lawmakers that just don't even understand what we're talking about half the time. So yes, we have a messaging problem. We have to do two things that I think are really important. One, we have to lead with the consumer protection front, as Shawn mentioned. We have to talk about the fact that this is going on just like sports betting was. Because I get this question all the time, was sports betting easier to pass in these states? And I said, yeah, because legislators could get their sort of mind around sports betting a little bit easier, right? They get it. They understand when we say, well, it's already going on. They're like, oh yeah, I had a bookie in college. Of course it's already going on. It's a little bit further of a stretch in their mind to get to the point where they say, oh yeah, I know my neighbor's playing online blackjack. It's not as simple as the sports betting piece. So we really have to get there and say, first off, yes, it's happening. We need to root out the illegal market. Secondarily, you got to call it what it is. I mean, you can't hide from it. But there are ways to do it safely and effectively, and make sure that we've got proper protections in place, right, Shawn?
You know, I think there has been complacency with the industry when it comes to iGaming. PASS was overturned. States went running to pass sports betting. Everybody in the room understood what it was. Every policymaker understood what it was. There was a general acceptance with the public and the policymakers on sports betting. And I feel the industry just felt, you know what? This will happen with iGaming. It'll have a domino effect. We'll roll it over to the next year. And in West Virginia, we did do that. We passed sports betting in 18 and iGaming in 19. But that was because we had legislative champion. If you don't have that...
Who was that champion?
Oh, I think that was me.
Oh, okay, all right. So, I just wanted to clarify.
But the public needs to get on board. The public was on board with sports betting.
Yeah.
The public had a demand for it. And what's the most important thing for policymakers? What is it? Getting reelected. Like, they want to stay there forever. And if they feel that the public wants them to pass iGaming, they'll move on it.
Yeah.
If they feel there's no public need or cry for it, it's not at the top of their agenda list. And now we have to find reasons to make it part of the top of their agenda list. And it's twofold. It's educating the policymakers, but also controlling the narrative with the public so that the public is also pushing for this.
Yeah. So we're talking about potential expansion. What states are next?
Boy, the $1,000,000 question. What states are next? So I'll lead up to it, all right? And here's what I will say. Here's the interesting paradigm that we're dealing with in the industry right now. So these conversations are really led from a revenue perspective. So even though we sit here, we talk about we need more education on the consumer protection front, we need to talk about illegal gaming, all those things are really important. But the states that are looking at this, that are seriously talking about iGaming, are states that need revenue, and they need revenue now. Now here's the problem for all of us in the industry. Those states aren't necessarily always business friendly, right? And they're not necessarily out to make sure that the industry is successful. They're out to make sure they capture the most amount of revenue. And so it's a difficult dynamic we're dealing with. And so as we look at the map and we look at those states, you're seeing a lot of states in the Northeast that are dealing with budgetary problems right now. It's math, honestly. And we had a lot of conversations here in New York. Unfortunately, those have fallen apart. I think that education is going to be key for making New York successful. I think New York comes sooner rather than later. I think probably in the next year or two, New York probably comes online. Obviously, a lot of discussions going on in Maryland right now. Shawn?
So I'll give you some names at the end of our session here. However, I do think we need to explain each state is nuanced.
Yeah.
Each state is nuanced. There's not a blanket way to pass legislation. So when you talk about New York, we're here in New York now, and we know that Senator Adalbedo and Assemblyman Pretlow are the champions of iGaming and have been pushing it for years. We also know that there's an issue with the unions, and so that's the effort and lobbying against iGaming expansion. When you go down to Maryland, we know that legislation is going to roll through Baltimore. But what's in Baltimore? Maryland Live, owned by Cordish. That's opposition. So you're going to have opposition in the House when it comes to iGaming because of the Cordish factor. And we also have a referendum. So you have that. That's a two-prong approach. And that goes to my point of getting the public on board. We could pass a law in Maryland and it doesn't mean anything if the public shoots it down with a referendum. So all of these states have nuances to it. And I think you really have to get in the weeds on these things. And I go back to, where's the money going? So for West Virginia, for example, we have what's called the Promise Scholarship. When we were moving iGaming legislation, we were able to say, this is going to help fund the Promise Scholarship. Similar scholarships are out there in other states. I think of Georgia. They have the Hope Scholarship, and they're talking about expanding sports betting now, and then in the natural evolution, they'll start talking iGaming. These are things that get funded on where the money goes that doesn't get talked about enough when the nuances come out of each state. But that's just two short states, 3 states examples of how tough it is to get it across the finish line. I mean, in Michigan, Brandt, when you were passing iGaming, what was the opposition there?
Well, it's funny because I get that question a lot. There didn't seem to be the opposition then that there is now. And I think that some of that really stems from we're seeing what's happening with sports betting. You're getting more opposition out there in the marketplace from other actors, I will say. And that's probably put pressure on iGaming. And we haven't even gotten into the tribal states, right? I mean, I remember in Michigan, you've got 23 tribal casinos, 12 different tribes, 3 commercial casinos in the city of Detroit. And it was an education process with each of those stakeholders. I traveled the state, meeting with the tribes, the chairman, talking about the revenue that this is going to bring in for their tribes, but also for the state at the same time, right? And I don't feel like that education process has necessarily unfolded in a lot of these states the same way. And I think maybe it does come down to a champion, but I think that is also incumbent upon the industry to go out and tell our story. We're not doing a great job talking about our successes. We're always, I feel like, we're playing a lot of defense when we should be out there playing offense.
I also think we talk about collaborative effort. There needs to be a collaborative effort with the industry to build the alliance. Not every company is going to think the same way, hold the same values, but the end goal of getting iGaming done in one shape or another is an end goal. But one group that has remained on the outside looking in that I think if you want to get iGaming expansion done, you have to bring them in, and that's the academic sector.
Okay.
Right now in West Virginia, we're passing legislation on responsible gaming and research, and that's going to help West Virginia University research the data, come back to the state, and have responsible gaming become part of this piece. And as you know, Brandt, if you have the education lobby as part of this piece of the puzzle about iGaming expansion, that changes the narrative. Because as a lawmaker, it's not easy to go against the education lobby. No. It's easy to go against the gambling lobby. Let's be honest about it. So these are things that need to happen to help move the ball forward, is to make sure you have all the pieces in place in a collaborative effort. And I really think the academic institutions in this country could play a big role going forward.
That's a great point, and we've seen that in, I think, some states with sports betting early on. You had the dollars being dedicated to education, and so we did get some support. I think that's fallen off, and I think that, again, some of the narrative has become, with lawmakers, why do I want to put a casino in people's pockets? That is, I hear that too many times, and we have to start that isn't the premise here, right? And that's what we have to push back on, I think, in a lot of ways. And again, it comes back to the education piece.
One pushback that we always hear is that this is cannibalization of casinos. And take a look at some of the states that I call mature states. Pennsylvania comes to mind. Since iGaming has passed, how many casinos, brick and mortar, have opened in Pennsylvania? 4. So you want to tell me that iGaming's cannibalizing the brick and mortar casino while casinos are opening? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. We have to have a factual analysis on these things. And what happens with politics? We had a panel yesterday. It was the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what was the ugly part? Politics. Because a lot of narratives come out and they're not necessarily true. And a lot of politicians tend to fall for them. And that's where the industry has to step up. We have the facts on our side. We have the data on our side. We have to have a unified message to get it across. That, at the end of the day, will make the difference. But you're seeing the opposition come in now, and their narratives aren't necessarily true. But tells me we're on the right path, because people will start, as you know, Brandt, quite frankly, making things up to try to slow down some progress. And that's something that I think we need to address head on as an industry, is say, hey, wait a minute, this cannibalization stuff, that's not going to fly. As a lawmaker, I have the data, I know what's going on, and let's have that frank conversation.
So how do you think you can attack that problem with the false reputations and false narratives? Is that with the data, or having the conversations, staying on top of it?
The data, we just had an Eilers and Krajicek study come out within the past month, which essentially says in states that are mature states that revenue has increased for brick and mortar casinos. We're not seeing a decrease in people coming in, and that a false narrative is a false narrative. And we have the data now, but it's a messaging problem, because you start getting in the weeds on things, you lose people. You lose policymakers and you lose the public when you get in the weeds. And that's kind of intentionally done, in my opinion, on not just iGaming, but any policy point, is that when you start getting the weeds on things, you lose your audience.
Yeah.
Just like if I start talking a bunch of data points up here, everybody will fall asleep, right? We got to stay with the message on point and make it concise.
Yeah.
We do lose that sometimes. I think that it's easy to get up, and I was thinking back to a recent hearing we had in Maryland a couple weeks ago. For those that watched it, it was 7.5 hours long. So we're getting into the weeds with these lawmakers, I think, a little too early on, and we're starting to talk industry, again, sort of nomenclature, the cannibalization piece, all these things that we know about, that we talk about every day, that you have to remember your baseline with a legislator is here. They've gone to their state capital to work on education issues, to transform their schools, to work on policing and road funding, and they didn't come to pass casino legislation. That's not why they're there. And so it's incumbent upon us to go around and honestly sell them as to why it's important. Where does the money go? How do you protect consumers? Why do you need to do that in your state? And we're honestly woefully falling short in some of that. And so it's on us as well to move through that education piece.
Another aspect to this that we don't talk about enough is the collaborative effort of bringing in the regulators as part of this. I see David Rebuck in the back of the room, the Hall of Famer that he is, who just recently retired.
Congratulations on the retirement.
And do we get anything done without having somebody like Rebuck on board? We don't, because there needs to be a collaborative effort so that as a lawmaker, if it's the Gaming Commission, if it's West Virginia Lottery, or whomever is responsible, they can come in and say, we can do this in a responsible manner. The framework was there and we're ready. Because that gives lawmakers the ease to say, okay, let's move ahead. If they're not part of the conversation, and I'm not saying they have to come in and lobby, but they need to come in and say, we can do this if you make the policy decision to pass it. And that gets lost in the conversation. They do not become part of the conversation until the end, and they need to be part of it at the very beginning, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah. So to round off, Brandt, you mentioned that we're not necessarily good at talking about our successes. Why do you think that is?
I think that sometimes we're a little scared of it.
Okay.
I think from an industry perspective, sometimes we're scared to go in and say, this is what we're doing right and this is how we're doing it. And whether it's become more profitable or whatever we're worried about sharing, we have to go in and be honest and transparent about where we're at and where the industry's at. And we also need to be transparent about why we need the help in some cases, right? I think that the individual that introduced the panel came out and said, the success of the industry is going to be in iGaming because of the dollars that come in. And Shawn and I talk about this all the time. The dollars that our states have seen from iGaming revenue is tenfold what you see from sports. And so if the industry needs this to be successful, you have to lead with that with legislators as well. Tell them why you're there.
And we also have to be upfront. Once we're legalized, treat it like a legal industry that it is, and not have the stigma that this is still gambling.
That's right.
And that's why we treat it as entertainment at Playn'GO, because we believe it can be done safely and effectively if you put people first, and that's your main concern. And that gets us to the sustainable model that we want to see. So before we wrap up, I know we're under 30 seconds. What states are next?
Yes.
I believe Maryland has a possibility here in the short term.
Okay.
New York is probably most likely next year.
Yep.
We have a presidential election, which is an absolute chaos in the United States right now.
Yep.
We all know that. So what do you think? 10 seconds.
Yeah, Maryland, New York. I like those. Those are good. I'll go with those.
Maryland, New York. All right. Well, thank you for joining me for this panel. Interesting conversation. And yeah.
Appreciate it, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.